Okay, let's everybody get calmed down. This is the last day. It's interesting that someone came up to me and showed me on, they had the cell phones that take the pictures, and there was a picture of last night over the building where we were downtown having the dinner. There was a UFO. And she's probably not set up there where she can show it. You probably can't show it on the screen. But you could, I said, well, maybe it's the moon. And she said, no, it's not the moon, it's moving. So somebody made a remark about that. Do you think they're over here? We have a lot of strange activity that happens when we're doing these conferences. Okay. Well, before Travis starts, he has a short video he wants to show, and then I'll introduce him. So you ready to go with the video? Okay.
You folks to meet the actors who portray Travis and Mike in the film. The other man, I'm sure you'll recognize right off, is perhaps best known for his hole-in-the-head role opposite Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2. He's the cop who won't die, but melts and gets split apart, everything else. But he's here, and he's in one piece. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome D.B. Sweeney and Robert Patrick. I think they like you.
This is Sergeant Reynolds from Criminal Investigations calling Lieutenant Frank Waters. Are you there, Lieutenant? Over.
Because it is true. Truth is a little stranger than fiction, as they say. And this is a good, solid script. And I like the boys. The boys are good. Of course, it's their picture, and I'm just kind of supporting them. But I like it.
To really relate to Travis and Mike, you and DB had to learn how to be loggers and...
Yeah, we were with the chainsaws out there logging, and I actually nearly took out a bunch of crew guys. I was supposed to aim it at the camera this way, and the lights and everything were here, and crew guys were here. And this is a huge tree, and I had it going, and I thought I had it aimed the right way. And next thing I know, it's going towards all these guys, and they're all running, they're screaming at me.
The whole energy of the cast came together pretty quickly. The first or second day we were in the room together, you could sort of look around and, oh, there's Craig Sheffer, yeah, he's Dallas, and Robert Patrick was already well into his thing, and it fell together very nicely.
Hey.
Hey, bud.
We said we do a little fishing when the contract's over.
When this contract's over, yeah.
Come on, it's what we need, one of our camping trips. Some hunting, some fishing, chasing bears.
Oh, yeah, I remember. You ran that bear up that tree.
Just trying to make friends.
How come you can't make friends with Dallas?
He's just jealous I can do something he can't.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
Reading, right?
Oh, I just play a sheriff who is a real character, Sheriff Waters, and he doesn't believe a word they say. He just doesn't believe in UFOs, and also he's never had a case he didn't solve, and it really gets to him because he's going to have one he can't solve, and it really bothers him. He doesn't believe a word about any UFOs.
You expect me to believe that a flying saucer came down and took your friend away to outer space?
That's the truth, mister. That's exactly what happened.
Is it? Is it?
And you know that, Blake. Why the heck aren't you speaking up for us? Why you letting this man talk to us like this?
David, I will.
It seems like you're not even trying to believe us. We all saw the thing. We all saw the guy get zapped.
How about you, Mr. Dallas? You go along with that?
Oh, yeah, I go along with that.
You don't sound too sure.
Well, I'm sure.
Why don't you fellas tell Lieutenant Waters what you saw? Or what you think you saw?
It was Dallas that saw it first.
What about it?
Tell us about it. What'd you see? What did it look like?
It looked like a fire.
I won't be the guest of honor at your party tonight. You can find somebody.
You wait.
Wait.
Your party life. And I hope you have a good time. I hope they treat you right. I won't be.
What in the hell is that?
Stop, Mike! Stop the truck!
Travis! Travis! You son of a bitch! What the hell you doing? Get back in the truck, asshole!
Travis, whatever were you thinking about, boy?
Well, you'd have to know me back then.
What, a Hellraiser?
Well, you know, I can explain what he did. You know, about three months before this happened, we had another little experience. He jumped out of the truck to chase a bear that ran across the road. And if you can explain that, you can explain this.
I'm not like that anymore. It's just,
You're not here.
You know, they're saying get back in the truck, and that was just kind of egging me on. I was scared too, but...
Hey, Mike!
Travis, get out of there! Who the hell is that? You feel that? Travis! Travis! Get the hell out of here! Get back in there! Travis! What the hell is that? He's dead! No! He's dead! He's dead! Oh my God! This woman's coming after us! Man, it's gonna kill us! Come on, Travis! Stay down! Stay down! Everybody stay down!
Yeah, it's an incredible experience playing these guys, I'll tell you.
Some of these loggers came back.
Mm-hmm.
One did not. You did not.
I played
Your
Travis
character.
Walton.
Right.
I see the UFO, I get out of the truck, and just after what we just saw, I get zapped by a bolt of light, and I'm knocked unconscious. The other guys think I'm dead, and they take off, and then Mike realizes I've left my best friend there. I got to go back, and he comes back about 5 minutes later, and I'm gone without a trace.
The other loggers did not know what had happened to Travis, right?
Actually, we're all in the truck just going home from a work day. And we see it, we all see it. He wants to get a closer look and walks out underneath it. So the other guys that are with us in the crew cab, they all see it as well.
Yeah.
So we have like 6 witnesses.
Right.
And then as DB said, I go back with the guys and we look for him. He's gone.
And in real life, this group went back and reported him missing, maybe even dead.
Yeah, we knew he was missing. We thought he was dead. We thought he was dead. And we went back to the town and we explained to him what had happened. We knew that it was, you know, it's a wild story, but we're sharing it with them, and they didn't want to hear it.
We've been telling you the truth since the beginning, and now we're ready to prove it. We'll take your damn lie detector test. You set it up. We'll be there. You go ahead. And if any of you got anything to say about me or my crew, you say it now. And you say it to my face.
Are you saying, Phil, that all 7 of these people are lying?
I'm afraid we have to say that on the basis of physical evidence.
Meaning?
Physical evidence that should have been there, but was not. Now, you heard Travis and Mike Rogers claim that this beam from the UFO was like a grenade exploding, fire, flame, that Travis was knocked 10 feet back, and in his book he claims he hit his shoulder against the rock. When the morning after this incident allegedly occurred, when the law enforcement officers went to the site to inspect, they found all kinds of dry pine needles, which, if this had actually happened, those needles would have been blasted away, they would have caught fire, they would have burned.
Why are you laughing, Travis?
Well, because this is typical of the sort of reasoning pattern this man uses in attacking all UFO cases. He's equating the absence of evidence to be the evidence of absence. That's absurd, you know, and that's actually a logical fallacy.
It's necessary for people to know just exactly what Philip Klass really is, who he really is. He's nothing more than a disinformation specialist from Washington, D.C.
Well, what's the word?
The results of one of the tests was unusual. It's inconclusive. We'll have to try again tomorrow.
What about the other ones? What's the word on them?
The process is still ongoing. We never discuss the results until all the testing is complete.
Sorry, fellas. Come back down here in the morning, 9 o'clock sharp.
No.
What?
I said no. Look, we did what we said we'd do. We came in here like guinea pigs and let you test us, but that's it. We've had enough.
I ain't coming back again.
You're saying that you're no longer willing to cooperate?
That's all we do is cooperate. And all we get back from you is grief.
Mike, we need a little bit of time on
No, Frank, I'm sick of this shit. You want to press charges? You go ahead. You do it now. We told you everything we know, and if that's not good enough, that's too damn bad, because that's all there is. Let's get the hell out of here.
What are you saying, son?
Well, Blake, my charts don't lie. If you ask me, those boys are telling the truth.
I think we can be rather certain that this incident occurred, that they're not lying. What they claim happened did happen, and it's not a hoax.
The fact that I have to make the audience believe this extraordinary thing has actually happened to me, and if I can do that, it'll be a great victory for me, because it's not a matter of getting them to believe that your dog died or that your car won't start or that you broke up with your girlfriend. It's asking them to believe something quite extraordinary, you know, of biblical proportions. And that was what initially got my attention when I read the script, that central challenge of making, you know, we're not making a special effects supernatural movie, we're making a movie about ordinary people where something extremely extraordinary happens.
You know, Robert, what about you? Are you a UFO believer, gentlemen?
Well, if I can believe I'm a Terminator, I think I can believe this. Yeah, I've had the theory, I think that Carl Sagan said it best, that we'd have to at least, you know, we can't be that arrogant not to consider that there could be something else out there. So I came into it like that. And then after I met Mike and Travis and talked to them at length about what they had experienced, I totally believe their story.
You do?
Totally.
So you believe that there are creatures out there who are far advanced technologically over us and even come and visit time to time?
I believe that these guys went through a very traumatic experience. I believe what they've told me. And as I said, going into the movie, I've always had the idea that it is a small universe. And we are a tiny speck. So we have to at least be open-minded enough to consider the probability.
Is it done or is it more? There more?
The video's done.
Okay, that's finished then. Okay, are you going to turn it off or are you going to leave that up? Okay, we'll leave that there then. Okay. I met Travis, it's been a few months ago. It was toward the end of last year, wasn't it, Travis? We were both in Hollywood filming with Anthony Cataldo for the movie 701. That's my first time I got to meet him, but I'd known about his story for many years. And it's funny, just a few weeks ago, I turned on the TV and there was Fire in the Sky on the TV. I hadn't seen it in years. But believe me, if you watch that movie, that is not what happened. Hollywood had to get a hold of it and had to make it into a horror movie. And Travis, you're going to be able to tell them, come on out. Okay. He's going to be able to tell you how Hollywood got around it and changed it totally. Because it's not like your book, it's not like what really happened at all.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what we both agree. There isn't all this horror and stuff. That's not what the UFO phenomenon is about.
But you know, at the time, it really did kind of represent my take on it because it was extremely traumatic for me. And although the part aboard the craft was fictionalized to a very high degree, it was very horrific for me. And it took all these years for me to gradually, have it dawn on me that it probably wasn't the way I originally interpreted. I accepted the term abduction, but now I'm looking at it more as an ambulance call. That by getting so close that I accidentally got myself hurt through no intention of theirs. When I wrote my first book, I thought that perhaps they had fired some kind of weapon, at least in mistake, that it was like defensive. But our famous UFO skeptic there wrote a paper back when he was of the theory that all UFOs were plasma, some kind of a strange electrical atmospheric effect. He was talking about, as evidence for this, that when an airplane flies at very high speed through the atmosphere, that huge charges can build up, static charges build up in the surface of the airplane to where they have to attach a ground wire to the plane before they can begin refueling because the danger that a spark will ignite the fuel. And, so Phil Glass there was saying that, some of the charges in these airplanes can be up to 500,000 volts. Trying to build the case that UFOs that are seen in connection with aircraft are really some kind of a strange electrical effect. He eventually abandoned that idea, but the point is that if a UFO was flying at very high speed through the atmosphere, that even larger charges might conceivably develop in the surface just from having traveled through the air so rapidly. One other theory I had about this energy that hit me was that perhaps it was a side effect of the propulsion, that as I got too close, they were doing their best to actually put a little distance between me and them in order to, prevent me from hurting myself. One of the crew recently suggested that the sound that we heard coming from it was, part of it was actually some sort of a warning signal, not to get any closer. But, I'm emphasizing that now because it was a kind of a mistaken notion that I had that, because of how, traumatic it was and how much fear it generated in me, that, they didn't take me aboard with the idea of tormenting me or doing experiments on me, that they were actually trying to save my life, to revive me after, accidentally getting myself hurt. So, it's an incident that has marked my life. It basically swept away everything that I'd lived before that point, and nothing would ever be the same again. It was very difficult to cope with, and even to this day, it's the major point of struggle in my life. But that morning, didn't have a clue what was coming. 7 of us went to work. In a movie, there's 6 crewmen, but there was actually 7. I think they kind of reduced the number of crewmen just to make it easier to cast, and there's a lot of people to keep track of. They also combined several of the investigators into one fictional character, which was played by James Garner. I had 2 brothers, Don and Dwayne, that were combined into one named Dan. And all of those are, acceptable kind of abbreviations. You're trying to tell a story that spanned years in 90 minutes. So some of that stuff I can understand, but some of it, there's just no basis for. And so I've been providing people with my email address, and also I have a website, traviswalton.com, and I try to get people to email me expressing their interest in seeing a movie that sticks more closely to what really happened, because I'm going to bind all these together and take them into the studio and demonstrate to them that there is a great interest in people to see what really happened depicted in film. But we'd put in a long, hard day's work that day. The end of the season was coming. We were going to be shut out of the woods for winter weather, so we were trying to get as much done as possible. And so we worked up till dark and loaded up our equipment. We're headed out of there. And in the movie, it gives the impression we'd been driving for some time and had become drowsy, but it was quite the contrary. We'd just recently been doing some of the hardest physical work you can do, so we were in a very alert state of mind. Everybody was driving along, bouncing along this real rough track and chattering away, and divided up the 7 of us into various conversations. And one by one, these little conversations fell off as they were noticing what I was noticing, just some glimmers of light through the trees. At first it wasn't, alarming. It was out of the ordinary. We're in the forest at night, and you really shouldn't be seeing any light. But at first I thought maybe just deer hunters that were camped there, because it was deer hunting season. We'd heard some shooting during the day. But we were driving south up towards the Rim Road, and the crest of the ridge was to our right, and so the ground rose up, but still the light was coming from higher than where ground level would be, and that was kind of, that's not fitting in with the idea of deer hunters. One of the crewmen, John, said that we were thinking, well, could that be the moon? And then he looks over and sees the moon in the other direction, so it's not the moon. There was one time on our way to work that we had come along, and there'd been a lightning strike the previous night, and the tree was on fire up high. So that's where this name Fire in the Sky came from, that we thought perhaps it was a forest fire, because that's not that all unusual. The Mogollon Rim area there has the highest number of lightning strikes of any place in the continental United States except for the Everglades. So there's quite a bit of lightning, and it was, but it'd been clear, dry weather, so that really wasn't adding up. And by then everybody was saying, what the heck is that? And we're looking at this and just little glimmers. The trees were really thick still. We hadn't worked that part of the contract yet. And but I could see up ahead where there was a break in the trees and the light was shining across the road. I said, Mike, hurry up, get up there so we can see what it is. And when we got up there and broke into the clearing, we're looking off to our right, and boom, there it was. Just unmistakable. You know, the UFO skeptic said, well, Jupiter was prominent in the sky at that time. This was not some little ball of light off in the sky. This was less than 100 feet away. It was unmistakable. And it was awesome. It was just, you know, the power and grandeur of the way this thing looked, it just, you know, was just a riveting thing to see. And right off the bat, Alan in the back yelled out, "It's a flying saucer!" A spaceship or something like that. I don't remember exactly his words, but you know, he was the one to, you know, say it immediately, because there was no doubt what we were looking at. It wasn't some hazy ball of glowing gas or anything like that. Less than 100 feet away, you know, about from here to the back of the room, and you could have thrown a rock and hit it. So it was unmistakable. Everybody was just impressed with the power and perfection. You know, it was glowing. And it was all smooth as glass, but the parts that were giving off light were also reflecting the surrounding trees. So it's kind of like when you see in the television and there's light coming from the window, you can see little things reflected off the screen too. But as soon as we saw it, you know, I said, "Mike, stop the truck," and I threw open the door as the truck skidded to a halt, and I jumped out and I headed towards it. Now, you say, "Why would you do that?" But I was thinking that it was going to take off and be gone before I got close enough for it to be that dangerous. Very often we're driving through the woods, and if you catch sight of a bobcat or you know, some kind of wild animal, you say, "Hey, look," and you know, very often before the rest of the crew can even look where you're pointing, it's gone. So that was kind of my thinking, that this thing was just going to be gone before I got that close. So I was hurrying when I first got out, and then you know, closer I got, I could see it wasn't taking off. And but you know, Alan and Steve and some of the others think that I was under some kind of outside control, like they were mind controlling me. And it didn't feel that way to me. You know, to me, it felt like this was, you know, an impulse that I just wanted to see it up close. I was curious. I was, you know, as astonished and amazed as any of them, but, you know, I just, you know, there was a little bit of showing off kind of to the crew when they started getting really alarmed about what I was doing and saying, "Get back in the truck." And, you know, that part of the movie was pretty accurate. They were swearing at me and they got more and more agitated the closer I got. But, you know, I suppose that if they were planting this thought in my mind, that they could make me think it was my idea too, you know. But to me, it seemed like an impulse, and as I got closer, I became more and more scared. And when I got up close, I was standing there looking up at it. It was about a 45, and it was just so perfect. And so, you know, John said it was like seeing a brand new Corvette. That's the way he describes it, you know. But, you know, it's just fascinating and fearful at the same time. And that's the way I was feeling, and all of us, you know. But the guys in the truck were saying it seemed like something was about to happen. And it wasn't just that I was getting myself closer and closer to what they could see was a dangerous situation. I think there was like a charge building up. Because, you know, the closer I got, the more I could hear the sound it was making. It was a very complex sort of a sound. Real high-pitched, high-frequency, sort of alternating thing. And then this rumble way down. The sound was covering the entire range of your hearing on the high end and the low end. So, you know, you were kind of like partly feeling the sound as much as seeing it, plus this feeling, you know, the hair on the back of your neck, sort of a situation where a charge is building up. And they said they could feel the vibration in the truck. But I was getting so close that it started to move and got louder all of a sudden and started to rise up. And so I jumped for cover. There was a big pile of logging debris there, and I couldn't really get that much closer to it anyway, but you know, that was the closest cover, this big log sticking up. So I got down behind the log, which is, you know, probably less than waist high. I'm crouching down behind that, and they're screaming at me, "Get the heck out of there," you know. And I didn't need to be told. I was thinking, you know, I've really done it now. But so I decided I was going to, you know, sprint back to the truck. So I stood up. And at that moment, that was the closest my body came to the craft. And that's when that energy hit me. And the movie played it down. It was far more violent than that. And it's really amazing to me that Hollywood, you know, they love to make a light show. They love to, you know, exaggerate things. But in this case, it just looks like a spotlight comes on and sort of tosses the actor back. But they said it was so violent that they instantly started yelling at each other, he's dead, he killed him. And they said it lit up the forest for as far as you could see, brighter than the noonday sun. And the power of it, and they said it would made a zapping or a crackling sound. That Dwayne Smith, one of the crewmen, he later became a journeyman electrician working on industrial stuff, and he said it sounded like high voltage to him. The surge in power was a familiar sound to him. This is what he told me back in '93 when I talked to him, right about the time the movie was coming out. But a lot of people have criticized these guys and said, you know, what a bunch of cowards. Well, you take off and leave your friend there, you know. But I take exception to that. These guys, it wouldn't have made any sense for them to risk their lives to save somebody that they thought was already dead. And Mike, being the crew boss, he was driving the truck, and his responsibility is the safety of the remaining crew members. So, you know, everybody's screaming at him, get out of here, you know. So he spun out the truck and, you know, was driving like a maniac, like in the movie, and dang near wrecked the truck, smashing the mirror, and, you know, just basically tearing it up, getting out of there. And they said they got down the road a ways, and they, you know, got a little better handle on themselves once they could see they weren't being chased. And they were trying to decide what to do, and at that moment, they could see out there on the rim road, because by then they were almost to the rim road, which is sort of a more traveled road. This little track that they were on was headed towards. And they saw these deer hunters go by, so, you know, they immediately thought it would be a good idea to go chase those guys down, maybe get some help, because nobody had any guns, and they just felt that they'd be safer if they had some deer hunters with them. So they went and tried to catch them, and when they couldn't catch up with them, Mike pulled off the road and, you know, was saying, what are we going to do? And in the movie, when Mike said, you know, we got to go back, and the guys didn't want to, in the movie, when he said, you know, if you want to wait here, you can just wait here, and we'll come back and get you. Nobody volunteered to get out and wait alone in the dark. They, you know, even though they didn't want to go back, they'd rather stay inside the safety of the truck and with the rest of the crew. So they did. They went back, and they saw the craft take off before they got in there. And Kenny, he's the second oldest on the crew, and he said recently that the scariest thing to him was not that the craft might come back when they got there, but how my body was going to look, you know, charred or something really horrific. So that's the kind of fear that was involved there. And a lot of people don't understand, and they don't give these guys credit for having the courage to come back and try to rescue me. John Gillette, he said, you know, he'd come from Vietnam, and he'd recently got out of serving there, and he said to him, to this date, that was the scariest moment of his life. And I think, you know, all of us can say that. Well, when they got back over there, they said they could see where the truck had spun out, so they figured out where it had been. And they said they got out and went looking and calling and searching for me. But when they got out, they only had one flashlight, so all these guys are just huddled as close as they can around that one flashlight. And Steve said he was doing his best to be in the middle of the group the whole time. But as they moved through the thick trees, you know, every so often the moon would glimmer through the trees, and they think, oh, it's back, you know. And so they were really terrified. But at one point, Mike fell to his knees and started crying because, you know, he was feeling a tremendous amount of guilt about having taken off like that, you know. But he regained his composure, and Kenny helped him up, and they started heading back. And they were arguing about what to do. You know, Alan, he'd always been in trouble with the law, and he said, no, we don't want to go to the police. You know, they'll just think we're crazy. Let's just get some friends with guns and you know, and come back. And then if we can't find Travis, then we'll report it. But, you know, the older guy said, no, you know, we got to stay honest about this the whole way. You know, even John was of that opinion too. And, you know, if we don't come right out with it, how's that going to look? You know, people are going to wonder, you know, if Travis doesn't, you know, can't be found, you know, we better just go report it. So in the movie, it was Mike that called, but it was actually Kenny that called the local officer, and he came down and they started to tell him what was going on, and he called the sheriff. So the sheriff was 30 miles away in Holbrook, and so they met with the sheriff at this service station, which was, you know, a working service station at the time. They waited there for him, and he came up, and the sheriff could see very obviously something really terrible had happened. You know, these guys were shook up. Some of them were still crying, but he thought immediately suspicious that they'd killed me. That, you know, there'd been a fight, and that they were just trying to cover up for my disappearance by making up this crazy story. But there was no doubt in their minds that this was serious. So they, unlike in the movie, they did go back that night and make a bit of a search, and then the real manhunt began the next day. They got 50, 60 people involved, people on horseback, four-wheel drives, and they crisscrossed and combed that area, and just, you know, a really thorough search that just widened with each passing day. They had helicopters and airplanes crisscrossing the area, and the tracking dogs could find the trail to the middle of the clearing, and that was the end of the trail. And they couldn't find anything more than that. The horses that some of the searchers were riding were behaving very strangely, and they even lost one of the horses, took off. It was temporarily, couldn't be found. But the farther it went, the more suspicion there was. Now, one of my brothers, you know, he grilled the men pretty thoroughly, and he became convinced that they were telling the truth. The other brother told them they were lying, threatened them, you know, that he was going to stomp them, you know, mud hole in the middle of them if they didn't fess up. That, you know, he figured they killed me too. And so during the search, this whole idea of murder grew and grew and grew. The crew men that went to help the lawmen in the search said that the sheriff put an officer with each of them that stayed with him the whole time, and pushed at him the whole time, you know, come on, just tell us, you know, what really happened. One of them other guys killed him. You're only going to be in trouble if you cover up for it, if you tell us, you know, come on, tell us. Alan killed Travis, right? And so the pressure was on, and then it came to a head at the clearing where, you know, one of the searchers grabbed Dwayne Smith and, you know, where'd you hide the body? And the guys were getting these kinds of shouts all through the town. And it was a tremendous amount of pressure. So the men said, we did not kill him. We'll take any kind of test you want. Give us sodium pentothal, give us lie detector, whatever you want. So the sheriff heard about this, and he brought in the top polygraph man in the state. He was did all the lie detector work for the Department of Public Safety, which is the Arizona State Police. And Cy Gilson tested the men, and he, like the sheriff, was fully expecting to find out that they had murdered me. And when the men passed, you know, there was, you know, the sheriff was so stunned he didn't know which way to turn at that point. But if you've seen the documentary, The Paranormal Witness, everybody involved has a very thorough interview on that one. In the last 39 years, there's been dozens of documentaries done about this case. And that one I always recommend because it was really by far the best and the most accurate. They even did some reenactments that were even more accurate than the movie. And polygraph examiner was interviewed, also the sheriff and his top deputy, and even the doctor who examined me after I was returned. But the theory that a crime had been committed just kind of set a tone in the community and things that was extremely negative and extremely hard to live through. But so, you know, I eventually came to comment that this incident, you know, had a certain traumatic event, just the experience itself, and then there was a certain amount of trauma that came from people's reaction to us in the aftermath of it. And I said, you know, it's a toss-up on which was worse. You know, the fear of the incident was extremely intense, but at the same time, the negative reaction just wouldn't end. You know, it just went on and on and on. I have to explain, you know, why I experienced it so incredibly negatively, and then after all this time, come to realize that, you know, there was probably more benevolent intention than I had at first realized. When I woke up, I was lying on my back, and there was a light fixture above me. And it wasn't, you know, all that bright, but it was the brightest thing in my field of view, and it hurt to look at. I didn't come to real quickly. I was just in and out. My vision was real blurry. I even had double vision for a while. And it was just gradual, in and out. A tremendous amount of pain. It was like the pain itself was knocking me out. But, you know, even above that, there was this feeling that I couldn't breathe. And that was aggravated by the, you know, the fact that they had this thing across my chest. I didn't even remember what happened, where I was, and then I remembered approaching that object. And I thought that maybe I'd been hurt somehow and that the crew had taken me to the hospital. So, you know, I could hear the sounds of movement around me, and I thought these were just doctors, and, you know, I couldn't focus, but, you know, I could see, you know, a dark area and a light area. I thought surgical masks and caps, you know, and, you know, it hurt to move, so I was afraid, you know, that if I moved too much, I might make it worse. So I tried to hold still, but the feeling that I was struggling to breathe was probably one of the main things that added to this, this panic that was building up. A lot of people think, well, you know, I wouldn't go crazy with fear like that, Travis. I would just stay calm, ask good questions, grab a few souvenirs. But, you know, it wasn't like that, you know. When they were waterboarding people, even though the terrorists know that that's an interrogation technique, and they train for it, it works anyway. Because the feeling of suffocation is more powerful than anything you can possibly reason away. And the feeling of suffocating, you know, added to the fear. Now in the movie, even though what was aboard the craft was so fictionalized, when they had the actor portraying me down on the table, and the aliens are standing around him, they've got this membrane over his face. And that didn't actually happen, but you know, he's struggling to breathe through it, struggling to scream through it. And I think that does a better job of communicating to the audience the origin of this incredible fear that I had, because, you know, everybody understands the feeling of suffocation and how that triggers fear. So, you know, although that didn't happen, that probably served a very useful purpose of communicating to people why I was about to lose it so completely. When I could finally, you know, focus my eyes more, you know, correctly, and I looked to see this doctor to my right, I was looking into the face of this alien creature, and then I knew where I was, you know, and I just flipped out, you know. I just completely was out of my mind with fear. And, you know, people who don't understand that, you have to combine all of these effects of you know, suddenly seeing them so close, and the pain I'm already in, the feeling of suffocation. You know, in one interview I'd said that I was breathing heavily. Well, our UFO skeptic went on and on and on about me claiming that I had been bleeding heavily. And it's very clear on the tape that I would say breathing heavily, but that was the kind of misrepresentation I was constantly getting with the naysayers. But, you know, being in this cramped quarters, dimly lit, you know, ceiling was low, tight, and the feeling of being surrounded. As soon as I saw them, you know, I had this surge of adrenaline that gave me the strength to roll away from them and get off the table. That thing they had on me fell off. But they were coming around the table, and I was backing away and screaming. And they were reaching towards me, and I bumped up against a shelf or a workbench behind me, and I just looked quickly to just glance to see what I'd run into, and I saw all these things laying there, and I just grabbed the biggest thing I could find. It was just this clear, transparent glass or plastic looking tube or rod or something, and I started swinging it at them. Now, they weren't close enough for me to actually strike, but I was basically trying to, you know, scare them away from me, and they stopped out of reach, and that moment right there, them staring at me, was the basis of the nightmares that I had for months and months afterwards. It was extremely excruciating, the stare, because I think what was happening there is that they were trying to reassert control over me. And somehow their mental ability to control has to do with the stare. When I was being interviewed for the 701, the movie, recently, I had an opportunity to speak with some of the schoolgirls that were there in Zimbabwe when the craft came down during broad daylight and recess. And they described the stare as being connected to the communication, but for them, it didn't have that painful sort of intrusive feeling that it did for me. And I think what happened was that when that energy hit me in the head, that it kind of disrupted the normal neural patterns. Because one of the many medical tests that I had after I was returned was a EEG, a brainwave scan. And because of the intense media scrutiny and everything that was going on, they entered me into Barrows Neurological Institute, which is a world-renowned brain trauma hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. But they put me in under an assumed name. And this was, you know, had a beneficial side effect that the technician did not know who I was or what kind of injury I might have sustained. But in spite of the fact that it was kind of like double blind, he reported an anomalous brainwave pattern in that report. And that backs up the idea that there was some kind of a neural disturbance that prevented them from containing me. And so at that point, you know, I was a very big threat to them because their main power was their ability to control, and I was much larger than them. Even in a weakened state like that, I was, you know, even having trouble standing. I was unsteady, but, you know, a bull in a china shop, they just turned around at that moment and left. I was thinking of fighting my way past them. Now, in the state I was in, maybe they couldn't actually read that telepathically, but, you know, my whole demeanor communicated to them I was going to try to fight my way past them and make it out the door, and the only door was on the other side of them. So when they left the room and went to the right, I wanted to get the heck out of there, and I went to the left. And I pieced together the layout of the craft later, and, you know, it was kind of a mindless, fearful run, and it didn't make any sense that I was looking for doorways that would lead out of it so close to the center of this craft. I didn't know where I was. I was just looking at something that looked like a doorway and trying to get it open. So at that point, running down this little passageway, it curved so tightly that I couldn't see very far behind me to see if they were chasing me, or very far ahead to see if I was running into something worse. So it was really kind of torn with the fear whether I was running from or to something. But when I came to this one doorway, I looked in, and the room seemed to be empty except for this chair, and it had a high back, so I wasn't certain there was no one sitting in it. So I moved around the edge till I could see no one was in it. But when I moved farther into the room, a star pattern became visible, and I figured out real quickly that it had to do with the position. If I was close to the wall, you couldn't see it. If I was close to the chair, you could see it. But if you looked straight at the wall while you were close to it, it wasn't there. And I pushed some buttons and tried to open the doors, and then my attention was caught from the doorway, and I looked, and there was this man standing there, and I immediately just assumed that it was somebody there to rescue me. And since he looked human, you know, it was a flood of relief, you know, that he was going to save me from these horrible creatures and take me out of there. And so I went up to him and started, you know, screaming, trying to get him to tell me, you know, where I was and what these creatures were and whatnot. But he wasn't responding. But because he had this helmet on, I thought maybe he couldn't hear me or talk with that on. So when he wanted me to go with him, fine, get me out of here, kind of a thing, you know. So he took me by the hand and by the arm, and went on down the passageway, and then through this, what I think was probably an airlock, because it was a little short hallway. This door closed and the other one open. And then when I came out, it was so much brighter outside. Didn't realize how dimly lit it was inside, but it was like sunlight outside. And it was parked inside of this huge building, or maybe an airplane hangar sort of a thing, maybe part of a larger craft. I was, you know, babbling on, screaming questions, and he was hurrying me. So I had to pay attention to where he was taking me to keep from stumbling. When he went down the ramp, it seemed really steep, and so, but you know, the footing was really sure. It wasn't very slippery at all. And I looked around, and I could see that there were some other disc-shaped craft in there, 2, maybe 3, shinier, rounded. But, you know, I was more concerned with where he was taking me. And I had to pay attention to keep from falling down, because he was in a hurry, and I was very weak and unsteady. So he took me through some doors. The room was shaped like a quarter of a cylinder. One wall curved up to form the ceiling, and then the vertical wall had doors in it, and he took me out of there through that. He took me down the hallway, and there were some other people in this room, and dressed like him except for the helmet. So I thought, oh, they're going to answer my questions. So I started over asking about where I was, what they were doing with me, and all this. And then when they didn't answer, that was when, you know, the no communication thing was becoming alarming for me. So I started to resist. They were trying to get me to come over here and lay down on this table, and, you know, I was thinking, you know, maybe I'm in the really hot water still. And so I started to resist, but they were so much stronger than me, and I was in a weak condition. They pretty quickly got me down on the table, but in my panic, I was able to jerk one hand free and get it under the edge of the mask. They put this mask over my face, and before I could pull it away, I blacked out. It wasn't painful like before. I just went out. The next thing I know, I'm waking up. A lot of the pain is gone. Very little of it left. It's cold air. I'm laying face down. My head was on my arm. And there was a light above me, and I looked to see where the light was coming from, and there was this craft hovering there. The light actually went off before I could turn my head to look in that direction. So there it was in the dark, just a shiny mirrored surface hovering there. Could see the highway reflecting in it. You know, I was laying kind of off to the side of the road, you know, just barely on the edge of it. And just as I looked, it just shot up into the sky. And it wasn't making a sound this time. And it was dark, so it seemed like it just vanished really fast, like it moved faster than you would expect anything could move through the air without, you know, creating a sonic boom or you know, a crack of a rifle or something like that. But it was just gone from sight really quickly. But immediately I'm looking around to see where I am, and more familiar surroundings. Even though it's night, you know, this is the forest, and I could see the lights of the town down below, and you know, I'd driven into that town so many times, I immediately recognized it as Heber. And that's not the town where I live, it's the town nearest where this happened. And so I ran down into the town, and I saw lights on, and I pounded on the window, and nobody came. There was smoke coming out of the chimney, but you know, I didn't know it at the time, but it was the middle of the night. Maybe, you know, they were frightened, somebody pounding on the door in the middle of the night. But so I didn't stand there too long. I just kept on going down the main road. I was afraid to go off into the darker parts of town. I crossed the second bridge, and I came to a service station there, and there was a row of phone booths. And I went into the first one and picked it up, and it was out of order. You know, I was about on the verge of collapse. I used all the strength I had to get that far. And so I went into the middle one, and it worked. In our part of the country at that time, you could just pick up the phone and talk to the operator. And I did. And she called my brother for me, and brother-in-law, and he thought it was a prank. He started to hang up on me. I didn't know it. I thought it was still the same night. But, you know, during all this time that I'd been gone, the family would be getting all these prank calls and crank calls and stuff. And he says, I think you have the wrong number, and started to hang up on me. And, you know, I screamed and kept him from hanging up, and I persuaded him it was really me. So he said, okay, I'll get your brother and come and get you. And I thought, my brother? You know, my brother lives in Phoenix. That's 180 miles away. But I must have collapsed. I must have passed out, because it seemed like, you know, I slumped down in the phone booth, and all of a sudden the lights are there, you know. Lights are coming through the doorway. My brother opened the phone booth and got me out of there. Now in the movie they had me naked, but you know, that's Hollywood for you. I was still wearing the same clothes. You should have seen what they had written in. They actually filmed it, you know, that I'm naked, and I come upon this couple parked in a car, and they're naked and I'm naked, and they start screaming, and that'd be a good reason to scream, wouldn't it? Lover's Lane, a naked man knocking on the window. But they cut that out, fortunately. So even the crew said it was dreadful, dreadful stuff. But, you know, I was fully clothed, and my brother put me in the car, and it became, you know, evident in the conversation there that I was thinking this was still the same night, because they were talking about how worried my mom had been on the search, and wait, you know, and they said, Travis, feel your face. And I had a 5-day growth of beard. And then I looked at my watch, the date had changed. You know, for some reason that was like the last straw. I was trying to tell them what I'd been through, what I just experienced, and I was just sobbing, and I just couldn't talk. And I just broke down and kind of went catatonic on them there. But driving back to Snowflake was this weird trip, because they'd been burning brush piles in the forest to the south there. And for some reason, the smoke was just staying right next to the ground and coming along within, you know, 2, 3, 4 feet of the ground. It was like ground fog in some kind of horror movie. And we're driving through the smoke as we were driving back to town. And then, you know, I had a reunion with my mom. It was extremely emotional. But my brother, you know, was saying, there ain't no way that I'm going to let that mob get a hold of him in the shape he's in. And because, you know, the sheriff had told the searchers to keep a lid on it, not publicize anything. But naturally, that was not respected, and it was worldwide news by the time I was returned. There were camera crews from other countries in town, and you know, Steve says they were trying to take pictures of him through his bedroom window, and he lived out east of town, and so they were taking pictures through my mom's window and stomping through the flower beds, and just prank calls everywhere, and you know, just a kind of a hysteria and just a kind of circus atmosphere in town, and you know, I was in no shape to handle that. So also during, you know, these calls I was telling you about, there was this one lady said she was a nurse and she was working in a hospital, and this old couple had had an encounter with a UFO, and they were in bad shape. And she left and came back on shift the next night. The couple was gone, their records were gone, and everybody was saying, what are you talking about? This never happened. And so she was saying, just be careful who gets a hold of him should he be found again. And another guy called and said he was retired CIA, and he made a similar warning. And you know, this didn't sound like a crank call. It sounded, you know, sounded serious. He left his contact information. So my brother's first impulse was not to, you know, tell the sheriff. The deputy came by while he was pouring gas in his truck. He'd siphoned out of another vehicle, you know, and in the town where we were, there were no service stations open, so he took the gas out of my mom's car and put it in his, so he could take me to Phoenix. The idea was he really wanted me to have medical attention immediately, but, you know, there's no way I could do that in that town at that time. And so when the deputy came by, he said, what are you doing? He said, I'm going back to Phoenix, which was the truth, and he didn't say a word about me. Now, the reason the deputy was there was because the operator had listened in on the phone call in the phone booth, which is against the law, but I'm glad she did, because the UFO skeptic was claiming I was somewhere else, you know, but that proves that I was there at that time. And because the phone company knew that that phone call came from that phone booth, those phone booths are still there to this day. And, you know, phone booths are obsolete. There are no phone booths anywhere left anywhere in that area at all. But they're still there. They leave them there, even though they're not hooked up to the phone lines anymore. And it's kind of a tourist stop. A lot of people, you know, stop by there and take pictures and whatnot. But anyway, so the sheriff actually sent men out there that night to, you know, dust the place for prints, and but they knew the call came from there. My brother took me to Phoenix, and he had been contacted by some UFO investigators during the search. And these investigators had done some testing on the site, and they'd found some unusual magnetic readings. And so, you know, they said if he ever shows up, be careful who gets a hold of him, but bring him to us. We have the medical experts to assess what he's been through. Well, so my brother called him, and he set up this meeting. We went to this guy, and he wasn't a doctor at all. You know, gradually, you know, it came out that he'd been a medic in the Marine Corps, you know. So so-called Dr. Stewart was not a real doctor, and so we left. And then, you know, that group, Ground Saucer Watch, lost possession of this very important case. And so their reaction was to then start attacking it. They had all kinds of positive things to say until we're no longer cooperating with them. But the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization figured out that I was really at my brother's house. He'd put out this thing to the media that I was in a Tucson hospital, and they figured out pretty quick that I was at my brother's. And so they said, you know, in exchange for cooperating with us, we'll sponsor these medical tests, and we have real medical doctors in our Phoenix membership. So they, right away, the doctors actually, these two doctors, came to my brother's house to make the initial examination, you know, house calls. So they checked me out, and then I went in for further testing. There was all kinds of tests because, you know, the first group started saying that it was all a drug hallucination, that this so-called Dr. Stewart was a drug expert, and he knew that I'd been on drugs. But so blood and urine samples were taken, were put through the county medical examiner's drug screen, which proved there was no trace of any drug in my body. On top of that, you know, it's been a question on several of my lie detector tests. At the time that the crew passed the state police lie detector test, the president of the American Polygraph Association, said, you know, of course polygraph is not 100%, but when you have 6 people passing tests on a single issue, the odds are over 1,000,000 to 1 of there being any kind of mistake. And that was at that time. Now, there's over 16 past tests in connection with this incident. And I've passed 5 different tests from 3 different examiners, all of whom had years of law enforcement experience, you know, the top sort of examiners in the country. And nevertheless, skepticism remained, and attacks continued and continued and continued. It's been a long, hard fight, you know, to fight back against a lot of these skeptical attacks. What was silly about the drug hallucination theory, which was similar to the transitory psychosis theory, that I had temporarily gone insane and hallucinated these events, or that the hypnotist had planted these memories in my mind, is that 7 people don't have identical delusions, you know, whether it's hypnosis, drugs, or psychosis, you know. It just didn't pan out. But, you know, people who were desperate to explain things away and really fearful that this could be true, they latch on to anything, even if it made no sense. So it was a long battle, fighting things back, you know, documenting things, all sorts of tests. I had a whole battery of psychiatric tests, proved to be perfectly normal scores on that. You know, ongoing research on the site. It was discovered, Dr. Harder performed the hypnosis. He was at the University of California at Berkeley. Dr. Leo Sprinkle reviewed the psychiatric tests that were performed by several other psychologists. He was the director of counseling and testing at the University of Wyoming. And the person on the right is Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a famous astronomer from Northwestern University. He was the author of the study, the Project Blue Book on UFOs for the Air Force. So gradually over the years, the consensus of experts have been supportive of what happened, but you know, it never ends. Various people have tried to achieve their 15 minutes of fame by attaching themselves to this incident in ways, even if they had to make up stories. This one lady claimed that I'd told her that when the UFO hit me that I'd run off in the woods and hid, and she claimed to have this all on tape. Well, she was challenged. Okay, we'll give you $1,000 if you can produce a tape that proves on voice print to be me telling you such a thing, because I'd never met this lady. And she immediately just became very angry and left the internet discussions. And it wasn't all negative, though. Some of the people claimed to have a connection when there really wasn't any. One of my strongest supporters claimed that when I went into the phone booth, my first impulse was to call him. And he wasn't home, so then I called my family. Well, you know, he's quite a supporter, but you know, I did not call him. The operator and the sheriff, no, there was one call made that night, and that was to my family. But there was another guy that came out on the internet and was claiming to be the sheriff's nephew. He was not the sheriff's nephew to begin with. He was actually the town marshal's nephew, maybe. The town marshal doesn't know who he is. I asked him about it, but he was claiming he had the inside story and that the sheriff knew it wasn't real, but he was going to back it up for tourist attraction, you know. It was just totally silly. He brought up the old drug thing, you know, even though that's been disproved. We showed you the service station. He claimed that what really happened that night was that the crew met with the sheriff and his men at the Red Robin Diner there in Heber. There is no Red Robin Diner in Heber. Red Robin Diner wasn't even invented for 20 years after that. But, you know, people were becoming more sophisticated. You know, when he comes on the internet trying to get attention that way, most of the people on that site just immediately jumped on him, punching holes in what he was saying. But one thing after another, ongoing fight, never ends. But I've written a book. I've took each of the charges that the skeptics made head on, provide the documentation that refutes what they say. But there's ongoing evidence and research still going on. It was discovered back in about 92 or 3, I guess it was 92, that the trees nearest where the craft had come down had changed dramatically. We went out there with a crew that were filming a TV show. It was either special edition or hard copy, something like that. And we had trouble finding the spot. I found out clear a year later that, that the crew boss had noticed that the trees were different, and he looked into it. And he discovered that the trees nearest where the craft had come down had suddenly started producing wood fiber at 36 times the rate they had in the previous years. Now this sample right here comes from a tree that was 85 years old at the time of the incident. And then just from the time that of the incident up to the time that the sample was taken, right before the movie came out, the tree had doubled in size. But because the outside rings have a higher volume than the inside rings, that's where you get 36 times the original amount. Well, the skeptics were saying, well, maybe there were just some wet years in there. But, you know, the records actually show that these were drought years, quite a few of them. And fortunately, here a while back, National Geographic came to film a show there, and we discovered a stump near the center of where this growth phenomena occurred. And it had been logged the year before the incident. So it was unaffected by any exposure to whatever was going on with the presence of the UFO. And here was a 200-year-old stump, and the growth ring fluctuations were like what you see from the center on back. Very little fluctuation for 200 years in that location on that ridgetop. So that's a kind of a benchmark, a sort of a standard that shows that the sudden increase in growth that occurred in these trees was definitely, you know, out of the ordinary and not a natural phenomenon. But there's ongoing research with that. A forest fire came through and killed a lot of trees, and you know, so we're scrambling to finish up the research on what might be going on there. National Geographic was kind of a disappointment. They were supposed to follow up on some things, like the radiation readings. They brought along a Geiger counter, but they insisted on going there when there was 2 feet of snow on the ground, and radiation will not come through water, and so we're unable to do a follow-up on that. So that's yet to be done. There was supposed to be a follow-up on the magnetic readings, and additional samples were taken of these trees that exhibited this accelerated growth. So there's a lot of new research coming on. Some of the, my chief detractor had written parts of several books about me and attacking me, and was able to obtain the FBI file through the Freedom of Information Act on him. And it turns out he was kind of a, in my view, you know, this was the evidence for that he was acting on behalf of the government. But I'm not going to get into that stuff. There's a whole lot to tell, a whole lot that went on, but because of the limited time, I'm going to open it up for questions now. So let's start that part of the discussion. Thank you. I use this slide
Travis?
right here to represent, illustrate my point about how things have changed over time. I just want to make one more closing statement here. Things have gotten a lot better locally. People are coming up to me, shaking my hand, saying, I was always a supporter, and now I don't mind saying so. So, at the time, they were making the assumption that everybody was against them, but it's not the case. I don't know, some of you have probably seen me on the show with the Kardashians, and we went to Area 51, and Bruce Jenner was making fun of me and the girls for believing that UFO phenomena is real. But he was making the assumption that he was taking the popular view and that people would be more supportive of him. But I got tons of email all slamming him. So the popular view is more people do believe it than don't. So, you know, the idea that nobody else believes you. At the time this happened, astronomers didn't know of a single planet outside our solar system. They theorized that there were planets going around other stars, and they even had a kind of an estimation. They figured 1 star in 100 had planets going around them. Now they say it's virtually a certainty that every star has about a dozen planets. So things have changed, and the whole climate of understanding is there. And I think what really needs to be turned around is media perception of it, and the common belief out there that nobody believes this but me. I must be kind of strange, but the truth is more people believe it than don't. So go ahead.
Travis, do you want to tell them about they are going to remake the movie?
Oh yeah, well,
yeah.
Because of the fictionalizations in the movie, there's been a push, kind of a grassroots effort to get a remake of the movie. So I've asked people to contact me through my website or my email and send me that they would like to see a more accurate retelling of the movie, because you know, I'm going to bind all these comments, and many of them I've already received hundreds spontaneously, that, you know, they would like to see this. And if I bind them all together, take them to the studio, I think that'll show them that there is a definite appetite out here for people who would like to see what really happened represented with my current understanding. And there's so much more to tell you, but let's take some questions.
We'll be taking questions right over here, stage right to your left, if you want to make a line now.
Travis, in your book, do you have the your new impressions that they really weren't there to hurt you, they were there to triage you? Is that included in your book?
Yeah, but you know, I've come to a lot more intentions along that line, and there's going to be a further update on that, and the evidence to support that comes from a lot of things that I, you know, just wasn't quite recognizing at the time. The fact that I was returned to a place where I could get help. They didn't dump me back in the woods where it happened, you know, which I probably would have froze to death before I could get help. They didn't take me to the town where I live, but the town where I live is in this wide, low valley, and there would be no place to descend that they wouldn't be seen by hundreds of people. Whereas Heber is in this canyon with steep walls, and they were able to come down over the road, and once they were beneath the edge of the cliff, they would be invisible to anyone. It'd be real easy from up high to see whether there were any cars coming down the highway. And so I was within a distance where I could make a call and get help. And that implies a benevolent intention, and, you know, some other things, you know, concerning, you know, my overall health and other kinds of circumstances there.
And I have one other question. Have you had any long-term or ongoing health issues as a result of this?
I just referred to that. In the last 39 years since this happened, I never called in sick to work one time. And that's, you know, I try to live healthy, and, you know, it could be a natural thing, but maybe not.
So invite them back for all of us. We'll stand in line. Have you had any subsequent contact, do you believe?
That's probably one of the most common questions I get, but I always try to sidestep that one too. At the time this happened, you know, I didn't want to go public at all. I tried to avoid the media. I was hiding out, you know. I didn't have a mustache back then. I grew a beard, and I was going to disguise myself. I was busted right away. People knew who I was, and Travis is back in town. But you know, refusing to do the interview did not kill the story. They would go ahead and do the story, but it was far more negative than it would have been if I'd have been there to set the record straight. So I did, you know, was forced to come forward. People say, "Oh, it's so great that you're, you know, coming forward." I really had no choice. I was stuck with it, you know, like it or not. So, but one of the common themes back then was the claim that I was some kind of a UFO buff, which just really wasn't true. I'd never bought a book on the subject, never gone to a conference, never bought a magazine, or, you know, I had a brother that had had a sighting 8 or 10 years before. And so the skeptics tried to say that I was come from this UFO obsessed culture in the area, which is just absurd, you know, with the pushback that we got from the community. It certainly was not a UFO community. It wasn't a UFO family. Surveys at the time said that 1 out of 7 people had a sighting. So a family of 7 or a crew of 7, like our work crew, it was inevitable that there would have been one. But they made a big deal out of this. They called this repeaters. And even serious ufologists, MUFON and APRO, they kind of upheld the idea that repeaters were not reliable cases, and that a real case had to be an isolated case. So, you know, I had a few minor sightings in my past, and I just didn't want to mention that because, you know, it had no bearing on the reality of what I'd been through. So, due to the fact that all I'm doing is discussing what happened because I have no choice, that's really all I want to get into about other UFO sightings. Although I have fessed up about one that we saw here in February. My son and my girlfriend were driving down the road in LA, and we saw one of these giant black triangles right there in the middle of the city. And I was thinking maybe I wouldn't tell anybody about that, but my son went online and he found this website called UFOstalker.com, and it's got a kind of like a Google Maps kind of a thing, and he found where at that date, at that time, there were 12 other sightings of UFOs right at that moment. So we weren't the only ones seeing this, and it was an incredible sighting because it was very close up, very low altitude, unmistakable, a lot of clarity and detail there. So I'll admit to that one. That was, we were on the 5, we were headed towards the 10 to go back to Arizona, and so it's probably maybe 5 miles from where the 5 intersects the 10. Yeah, it was Burbank. We just left MUFON, LA MUFON had a meeting, and Tracy Torme, who was the screenwriter on Fire in the Sky, had just given a talk, and we left that and we're headed back to Arizona. My girlfriend had to go to work the next day, and so we saw that thing, and it was truly amazing. Anyway, next question. That was just this last February. What was the date? Do you know the date, Jillian? Well, right in there somewhere. You know, all you got to do is find out when LA MUFON had the meeting where Tracy Torme was speaking, and it was just right after that we lay off there.
Travis, I'd been wondering, I read your book a couple of times, and what do you think it signifies that the Nordic types did not communicate with you on the crowd, if anything?
Well, I was suspicious about their non-communication, of course, and I was thinking, well, maybe they have some kind of an accent. Some people think, well, maybe they don't even speak vocally. Maybe it's all telepathic. At the time, it just seemed like all they were trying to do was keep what I would be able to recall to a minimum. You know, no information. All right, he messed up. We fixed it. You know, put him back together. We'll put him back, and all he's going to remember is that. And during the hypnosis that Dr. Harder performed, there was a block with a threat about trying to get at memories other than what I had reported there. And I didn't understand that at the time, and even the APRO people kind of seemed to kind of discount that, like maybe it was just my own subconscious fears. But I later come to realize that Dr. Harder may have been, or even the aliens, had put this in there so that if hypnosis were done on me and I was regressed back to a time during which I was in cardiac arrest, that they might actually cause cardiac arrest. And so the warning was I might die if this was tried, because, you know, once you're in cardiac arrest, hypnosis isn't going to work anymore. You're not going to be responding to that. How are you going to bring somebody back? And so for that reason, I was fearful about undergoing further hypnosis to try to get at memories of the other 5 days. And, you know, that's the source of the block there. And, you know, I thought that maybe the memories might come back spontaneously. And back in '93, when I was doing so many interviews for the movie, I thought, you know, because I started having these dreams, that maybe memories were coming back. And I asked Tracy Torme about it, and he thought, he kind of discounted that at the time, he thinking that it was probably just because I was talking about it again so much after so long. But now he's thinking that maybe that was glimmers of memories breaking through. I would think that after 39 years, if anything was going to come to me, it would have happened by now. But I'm not planning any new hypnosis.
Thank you, Travis, for sharing your story and being brave. I have 2 questions. First question is, since that time, do you feel that you've had clairvoyance or knowing? Maybe
Another one of those questions I'm always ducking. Well, you know, I never wanted to be the bug in the jar. I didn't want to be the subject of study. Study the incident, don't study me, you know. But, yeah, well, let's just leave it at that.
Other question is, do you feel like that you've always been under some type of surveillance, maybe seeing black helicopters, or even before you
probably,
had to worry about
you know,
that?
Some people wonder, are the aliens still watching me? Maybe, but more likely the government. But you know what's really strange is that all the government harassment has been directed at the crew boss and the youngest guy on the crew. Those guys have had all kinds of harassment over the years, even into modern day, and nothing directed at me. Even our famous UFO skeptic there, he wasn't even on the Larry King show with us. Because of the hostility between us, they had him in another part of the studio. He never addressed me directly. I never addressed him directly. I never laid eyes on him. It was that was the closest ever came to any contact with him, even though he devoted parts of several books and all kinds of papers he sent out to the media. He never attempted to contact me. You know, you would think, since he likes to, you know, telephone people and record the call and then chop up the tape to make it seem like you said something he didn't, that he would have tried that with me. You know, the media was able to find me, but he never once in all those years, even though he wrote books about me and dragging my name through the mud, never tried to contact me. And I find that very puzzling. And I'm not trying to offer any kind of a theory. It really doesn't make sense to me that they avoid me and go after those guys. So anyway, next question.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Walton, of all the presentations I've seen, this was as free-flowing and smooth and informative, and with the right amounts of humor spread out through it, so personable, that I think you have completely debunked yourself. Because any normal human being like any normal human being like the rest of us weirdos here at this conference would be at least, even these decades later, partially fragmented and not normal.
Well,
so I think you
if
have,
you've seen some of my early interviews, I've come a long way.
well, I think you've completely debunked yourself. I think you're obviously an alien.
Sometimes I feel like one. A stranger in a strange land.
My name is Leon Freeman. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. And this story I'm going to tell, and I believe I've seen the movie. I purchased your book yesterday. And what happened, I live in Memphis, and I never talk about UFO. People say you're crazy. But so happened, a fella I knew by the name of Dexter Shegard from Polk, Mississippi. After he asked me, could I do him a favor to take him to Polk, Mississippi for a family barbecue. I had never mentioned UFO because I don't normally talk about that. Went down to Polk. It is a very isolated town. You may go an hour before you see a house. It's just that isolated. No traffic lights and nothing. And after the first time, I came back to Memphis, I saw a UFO. I remember the time and everything. And then I started going to UFO conferences. I went to one in Denver, Colorado. It was about maybe a year after the first time I'd gone to Polk. And I still didn't mention UFO to my friend Dexter. And then he asked me would I take him back to Polk, this about a year after the first time, for a family birthday party. I said yes. And I had been to the UFO conference. I said, I'm gonna take one of these DVDs about UFOs, because these country folks, they never heard about UFOs. That's what I thought. And I still did not mention UFO going down there. And once we got there, I showed him, I said, look, I want you to look at this DVD. Brand new DVD I got at the conference. They put in 3 TVs that would not work. And I said, oh, by the way, it was about UFOs. Have you ever seen a UFO? As God is my witness, you couldn't pay me $1 million to go down to Polk, Mississippi again. Nobody. Because what happened, the mother said, she don't know, but she was coming home from work one night, and these 2 bright lights was following her. She said, I know they could get me if they wanted to. That was kind of strange. Then she mentioned she had gone to the store and got lost coming back home. That's missing time. And then the shocking thing, the fellow who I'd gone down there with, who had never mentioned UFOs, she said when he was a little boy, he was saying, Mama, these people, they come and get me, and they take me out the window, and they don't even raise the window. And she just, you know how you think little kids are just joking? And I was just in complete shock. And then I guess about 30 minutes later, we went to the party, and his mother and grandmother wrote together. He wrote to me. I said, Dexter, have you ever seen a UFO? Or do you know anything about it? We was going around this little, I guess, this little country road. He said, I remember like it was yesterday. I was sitting on that hill right there, listening to my portable radio. It was dusk dark. He said, a bright light was shining down. I looked up to see what it was. He said, that's the last thing he remembered. What he remembered next, it was 10 o'clock, about 10 o'clock the next morning. He was in his grandmother's house in the bed, naked with his shoes on. His grandmother did not let him in the house. She thought he had broken into his house. And I mean, I was just completely in shock. And then when I got to the party, I was so, I guess, surprised. I was telling everybody there were about 8 or 9 children, about 7 or 8 adults. And I was telling one of the adults that I thought Dexter had been abducted by a UFO. I said, have you all ever seen a UFO? One of the fellows said last summer they were playing baseball out in the field, and this silver object was coming down. They all ran away. And they had never talked about UFOs to each other until I brought it up. Strange thing.
Well, you know, you'd be surprised how often that happens. So somebody will tell me about a personal experience they had, really dramatic sighting. They have these sightings with other folks, and then when they go back to the people that they shared this experience with, those people will say, what are you talking about? You know, they don't want to talk about it anymore, or they even claim that they have no memory of it, you know. But very often when you hear personal experiences like this, you know, I ask them, did you report it? And they go, no. You know, that's no, you know, misbehavior on their part. It's just people, it's a personal experience. They don't feel the need to report it. But that does contribute to the feeling that people have that, you know, this is some kind of a fringe experience rather than being more common than not. Anyway.
Hello. On one of the illustrations you showed about the male and female beings that looked more human,
yeah.
The female was holding some sort of dark sphere. Do you know what that was?
No, what was your question?
The female was holding a dark sphere on her hand.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it was probably just some sort of a gas to put me unconscious. It didn't have any hoses connected to it. I think the little black sphere was probably just some sort of gas charge. That's just speculation, but that's about all I know. I know that I just went out real fast. I've only had anesthesia one time in my life, and it was kind of like that. They said, okay, we're going to do it now. And I said, I was going to fight it just to see if I could. You know, there was no fighting it.
Thank you.
Okay, I was just curious about the sounds that you heard from the ship.
Yeah.
When you're at the site. And if you had since then ever heard this same pulsing that was, you know, the low spectrum and the high pitched, and if you had either any dream or any recall of anything that was a phrase or words that came with it.
Okay. I'll answer the second part of the question first. The grays dominated my nightmares for months. I mean, you know, I would wake up in a total panic, and it all was focused on that stare and that penetrating feeling. It was very excruciating. It was intrusive, invasive, and gave me a squirmy feeling in my head that was very, very horrible, just horrible. But, you know, and that contributed to my feeling that this was some sort of a traumatic event. But all they were trying to do was, you know, keep me from hurting them and myself, and it just wasn't working. And so all of them working in concert to try to get through this jumbled nervous system, it wasn't working. So that's why it was so painful for me. The other part of the question was,
if you recall having heard these sounds again.
Oh,
and
yeah.
If so, if you were hearing any
well,
words.
you know, I had encountered that sound in the woods before, many years before, but I never saw the craft in connection with it. I would just hear the sound moving across. And that was kind of the things I didn't want to talk about back then, because you weren't supposed to ever have any experiences. Now people say, what? You only had one experience? Where's the rest of them? You know, because that's the standard thing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Walton, I'm curious about the hangar that you perceived with the two other crafts. Did you think it was someplace on Earth, or maybe they had gone back to their place of origin?
I'm thinking that this could have been an actual military installation somewhere on Earth, or it could have been underwater, an alien installation, or on the back of the moon, or a nearby planet, or someplace much farther away. But, you know, I really don't know. I don't know where it was. You know, the light that was coming through there seemed like sunlight in color and brightness and everything. But if those were windows and not light fixtures, it was just a translucent panel rather than an actual window. I couldn't see outside, so I have no idea where it was or how far I was taken. And since this is the last question, I would like to apologize to you all that I didn't bring enough books. However, I've got 2 left, and what I'm going to do is anybody that pays for a book today, I will, you know, mail it to you when I get home, free shipping. So I'm really thank you for listening. Thanks for coming. You know.